hello everyone, it is Peter Sam, the narrow gauge engine here, and I'm here to begin my promised re-rankings that I announced in my 100 subs video way back when. A year ago I ranked all of these season 1 episodes from worst to best, and I'll be doing the same a year on since I really do not agree with my picks and my choices in the same way. I've thought about this for like all the seasons I did, not the pack miniseries episode because I found that to be pretty correct even now, even this far on. But let's begin with number 26, Thomas and the Guard. Of course this was going to be fucking here. It's boring, it's lackluster, it's very much challenging to sit through. My main problem with this episode is the fact that the Guard's incident, him falling over this old lady's umbrella, has nothing to do with Thomas. It's all blamed on this old woman. The fuck? The way you should be writing Thomas is that he does something bad or something bad happens to him and he apologises for all that shit. So why doesn't this episode do that? It's really bad in the moral regard and the story regard. There's nothing really there substance wise, and no other episode in this series, I'm glad to say, does this shit. Let's just move on. Number 25, James and the Coaches. I don't really know what it is with this episode, but it's just so tricky to sit through. James and the Coaches is made up from two Audrey stories, James and the Top Hat and James and the Bootlace. And it really feels like the first story takes up way too much of this episode, and James and the Bootlace is just shoved aside. And I don't really like this balance because I feel like James and the Top Hat is the worst story out of the two, and I think more time should have been spent on James and the Bootlace because it's a more interesting story. I think the balance is just not in my favour per se. Number 24, Thomas's Train. This episode has such a boring basic concept that it's very just dull and lifeless. Some of the sets are nice. There's one set in particular from this episode that stood out to me, and that's the level crossing one with the house beside it. That's very nice, but aside from that, what has this episode got? Nothing. There's nothing there. I mean, it's a very good contender for 26th place, but I feel like Thomas and the Guard is just that much more shit. Number 23, Percy Runs Away. You little bastards thought I was going to be that much more lenient against this episode? Fuck no, it's still half shit. The Runaway's alright, I've seen better. I think it's just half shit, and it's half full of all this tender engine stuff that I don't really care about. It's just sort of cleaning up the mess they made in Trouble in the Shed. It's just sort of tidying up that shit before it moves on to this Runaway that ultimately means nothing really. It's all born out of miscommunication and just shit. And I've sort of gotten over what Gordon says at the end with the stopping the accident thing. I'll go over that now, but it's just, I feel like there's bigger problems than that with this episode, so that's why it's down here. Number 22, Trouble in the Shed. Well, speak of the devil, this episode is confusing. The way I understood it, the engines went on strike because there's no shunter, to which the Topham Hat gave the engines to Percy, but then they bullied Edward, so they got shut up in the shed regardless. I don't see the point of having both situations here. I mean, either way, Percy is what makes this episode, and that's why it's higher up than the rest. So, yeah, deal with it. He's one entertaining engine, I'll tell you. Number 21, Down the Mine. Let's see how many people I can aggravate with this opinion. Down the Mine is fine, and I really do think it's a bit overrated. The plot is very simple. It gives us some nice character interaction and some banter between Thomas and Gordon. The ground caving in on Thomas is fun. You know, the whole crash bit, that's fine. I think the main problem is the mine just wasn't introduced early enough in the episode, so it just feels like it's there for the sake of it. The gimmick is one that is infamous and it keeps being referred back to, and if we got earlier episodes with this said mine, I think I'd like it more, but it's just the fact that it's just there, just convenience. You know, it's plot convenience. Number 20, Thomas Goes Fishing. Another infamous episode that's a bit overrated. Thomas Goes Fishing is another one I don't mind. It's one I respect more than I like, but I feel like there should have been more done with this idea. The plot just feels so unfinished and it is really weird. I don't know. It's a fine episode. I just feel weird watching something that feels as first draft as this does. Number 19, Tenders and Turntables. One part good, the other part tenders. I love the James segment of this episode. He makes it. The Gordon part though is okay. It's nothing too interesting. It more or less sets up the bit where James is on the turntable fucking spinning around, but it just feels so drawn out for no reason. Like, geez, can we just get to the fun parts for fuck's sake? Number 18, Whistles and Sneezes.
My problem with this episode isn't the story or anything like that. My problem lies with the fact that this is 2 railway series stories made into one. Let me explain. The flow between these 2 stories is so weak, and it's a problem I can't overlook, like a weird line or a goof. It shifts the whole episode's like pace, and I don't like it. The one thing James and the coaches did well was it flowed between episodes. This is horrible at it. However, I do find the 2 stories at least some parts amusing, so that's why it's not further down the list. Number 17, Thomas in Trouble. I love how this episode brings Toby to the railway and deals with the often overlooked legal side of these episodes. Like in season 5, there's a giant flood. Where's the fire service for this shit? However, the quality of this episode dips after like the first half, and even when Toby arrives, I'm sort of bored. So as much as I'm thrilled by the concept, execution wise, I don't like this one. Number 16, Edward and Gordon. It's a very good prime episode that's simple and sticks as closely to the book adaptation as possible. However, compared to others on this list, it's a bit boring in the story aspect, but if you want episodes of just trains sticking around for like 5 minutes, this is actually a pretty good one. Number 15, Thomas and Gordon. Another one with trains just dicking around. This episode does a lot to set up Thomas and Gordon, and it has some very good sets that are reoccurring throughout the whole series. Gordon's theme is a jam, and so is that short turntable one at the end. However, where this episode fails me is the interest. I remember watching series 1 a lot as a child, and this would always be the first episode, so needless to say, it got old quickly. However, I still do like it, and I probably could memorise the episode line by line at this point. Number 14, Troublesome Trucks. James proving himself in a season so full of him being a dick. Of course I'm gonna like this one. It's nothing major, but I like the arc James goes through with this episode. It starts with James being the most disliked engine, and ends with him being a hero character. Amazing, simply and truly. However, it was shy from the upper half of this list for one reason. The others are more entertaining, and thus this leads me to number 13, Off the Rails. Off the Rails is your quintessential Gordon episode featuring arrogance and the like. This arrogance causes Gordon to slither into a ditch, and despite Gordon's attitude, I find it pretty entertaining, especially when you know that this accident is coming and then it will be prime and perfect karma. I definitely overrated it in my previous video, but I still think it deserves to be on the upper end of the list. Number 12, Thomas and the Trucks. Okay, so this is an episode that nobody saw coming. I like this episode a lot because it's so direct and forward, and there's no annoying characters or uninteresting scenes. It does take a while to get to the really good bit, but every scene beforehand is necessary to the plot, and I can respect that. I've heard arguments that Dirty Objects does the runaway scene better, but that's why it's higher up. Also, just because a person does something better than another doesn't mean that second person's thing isn't good at all. It deserves its spot rightfully here in my eyes. Number 11, The Sad Story of Henry. The Sad Story of Henry is an entertaining gem, with every scene being at least somewhat entertaining. It's definitely a fun one to watch, and the beauty of this episode is down to the beautiful narration by either Ringo Starr or George Carlin, and the only downside is the minor thing that this episode all takes place in one setting, which can get a bit boring, but I think the characters and the model work easily makes up for it. Number 10, Edward, Gordon and Henry. Well, this is an aptly named episode. Edward, Gordon and Henry takes elements from the previous episodes. The Gordon scenes like in Thomas and Gordon, the Edward triumphing story from Edward and Gordon, ending the Henry story from the previous episode. These elements are all the best parts of the episodes prior, and thus this episode is amazing. The ending especially is pretty heartwarming for a season 1 episode. I always look forward to this episode when I watch season 1. Number 9, Cole. Oh, Cole. Despite that one goof where Henry leaves the station on accident, and how void you are of being funny or aesthetically pleasing, or having a giant mega crash, you are worth the 5 minutes. Nothing is as sweet as Cole in this season, maybe aside from one episode. However, we'll get to that one. Cole has Henry overcome his illness and become a really useful engine. The one problem is this episode having it a couple episodes previous to the one where he goes on strike really does throw a spanner into the works, because one moment you dislike him and then suddenly you feel bad for the guy. It creates conflicts and makes Henry all the better of a character, actually. Number 8, Thomas's Christmas Party. This episode rocks. I really do love it. One thing most of the Christmas episodes in Thomas and Friends do well is really bring everyone together and gets you, the viewer, to reflect on the season by showing some previous characters that have come to fruition. Percy, Toby, Terence, for example. They all appear, among others. It has its flaws,
Beatles, don't get it twisted. Like, Ringo Starr's really bad singing despite being in the Beatles, and the fact that it took the Engines a whole year to truly thank Mrs. Kindly like this. Things like that. But I think this consistent, feel-good sort of community spirit is so present here that it outweighs all of what is wrong with it. I love Thomas's Christmas episodes. They are so good. Number 7, James and the Express. Boy oh boy, did I not expect to see this so high. James and the Express really gives you that final nail in the coffin that James is here to stay. Troublesome Trucks showed him to be reliable, sure, but this proves James can make friends, do right by the passengers, and be really useful after all. The episode also gives more character to Gordon by making him accept shunting, something later disregarded, but it's still fun to see some momentary progress. Number 6, Thomas and the Breakdown Train. Okay, so I understand you might be thinking I'm insane, right? I mean, why would we want to watch this when The Adventure Begins does this episode so much better? Well, for me, Season 1 is a season that bathes in realism, despite being a TV show about talking trains. So Thomas isn't going to do some dramatic action chase to try and save James, but what he will do is act responsibly, and in the face of danger, be sensible. That's why I always love Season 1 over The Adventure Begins. The realism is lost in that film. I still like it, but I think Thomas and the Breakdown Train is the perfect arc finisher for Thomas, the new childlike engine who finally learns how to be responsible and helps an engine out because of it. Number 5, Thomas, Terence and the Snow. Yeah, I may have gone a bit overboard with Thomas, Terence and the Snow last time. I still love it, that much is true, but there's better out there in Season 1. This takes place in autumn and winter, both seasons presented beautifully in the sets, and we meet Terence, a reliable, happy little orange tractor, and he proves his worth to an unconvinced Thomas who is stuck in a snowdrift after crashing into it. Every scene is important to the story, unlike some other episodes. Thomas meeting Terence, the snowplow fiasco, the climax. I think this is a great winter episode overall for many other reasons, but since we're getting close to the top 3, I'll move on. Number 4, Dirty Objects. Dirty Objects is a very well made episode, from the character interaction to the runaway and crash, to the beautifully written karma of it all. James and Toby are two characters that have great interaction, both thinking the other is silly and untrustworthy for their own reasons. So pairing them makes for a great episode. The runaway and crash are superb, the themes making it more intense as James rushes down Gordon's hill. The crash, despite being pretty tame compared to later episodes, is still amazing for Season 1, and James being covered in tar is great karma. Dirty Objects is a great 5-minute watch, and it will leave you wanting more. Number 3, Toby and the Stout Gentleman. This is gold dust. Fucking gold dust. Within the short span of 5 minutes, we meet Toby, learn about him, receive a short little cameo from the Fat Controller, have his line closed down, and leave the episode on a hopeful cliffhanger. What the fuck? How is it this good? Something I'm really impressed by is how much we care about this little steam tram by the end of the episode. Another thing is, all the new sets for Toby's Railway are ones later used even in Season 3, and I can see why, because they're so beautiful. Toby and the Stout Gentleman is a lore unto itself, and an episode I'm proud to have in my top 3. Number 2, Thomas and Bertie. Wow. Thomas and Bertie took me by surprise. I think the best thing that the episode does is have a balance between narration and action. The action doesn't go on for too long, and the narrator doesn't speak too much as the episode picks up, which is great. It's a wild ride and leaves you on the edge of your seat, even when you know Thomas wins, because it's a lot of fun. They should have made this a ride at Drayton Manor's Thomas Land or something, because it's such a good episode. But it's also excellently written and a great character that unfortunately later becomes one-dimensional. Thomas and Bertie is fun, exciting, and just a real good episode in general. Number 1, The Flying Kipper. Do I even need to explain why I put this in first? It's the Flying fucking Kipper, a journey at a frosty dawn that ends with Henry crashing into a brake van. It's a beautiful journey that goes from peace to disaster within 2 minutes. We also get Henry's major repair and him being fixed properly, which is great for his character. For at least a while. Do I need to carry on? There must be 100 reasons this episode is so worshipped, but we all know the main ones. This is an undisputed fact within the fandom. So, that was Season 1. A lot of things have changed from last time, as you could probably tell. Hope you like this video, and if your list is different to mine, you're wrong and inferior. Only joking, of course. But anyway, I'll see you in February for Season 2. Goodbye.